Hello and welcome to Cricket8 Podcast. It took India 11 years to win an ICC trophy. It also took India 5 days to get to India from Barbados. There was a hurricane that elongated the wait for the Indian fans, and finally, the Indian team is here in India. The reception has been phenomenal, be it in Delhi. They also met the Prime Minister, and subsequently in Mumbai, there is to be an open bus parade as we go live, and that would be something to watch out for, the reactions, the celebrations, and all of it. And I can't help continue gloating over India's win because Jared and I have not had a conversation over it.
Mhm.
So, this episode as well is dedicated to India's win. And there are a lot of questions around Anderson. We'd also address those. But first things first, Jared, India winning the World Cup and the reception that you must have caught glimpse of thus far. Your thoughts?
I hope all the people who spent years saying that they were chokers are really enjoying the victory.
Thanks.
Because
But that
we spent,
joke comment, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, we spent years hearing this, right? Like, if you're in the industry, that's all you ever heard. Anything I wrote about India, and this is mostly from Indian fans, was, why are you talking about them? They're just a bunch of chokers, right? And people like you and I would say things like, actually, they're a really good team. They just haven't won a major. No, you're wrong. They can't handle the pressure. And I'm hoping that some of those people are out there watching them on the open bus stop and enjoying them today. I mean, that's how fans work, but it's also worth remembering. One of my favorite things is, you know this, that they're giving the players all money, aren't they, for winning
Yeah.
the World Cup from the government. So if Heinrich Klaassen didn't edge that ball, or if Sky accidentally did go on the Toblerone, or if Sky dropped the catch, or if there was a no ball when Heinrich Klaassen should have gone an edge, or whatever it may be, does that mean they wouldn't have been worthy of the money? Like, they would have been roughly the same amount of the same side. It just shows you how we build this side of things. And I do feel sorry for all these players and all the players who haven't won a World Cup with India, who played brilliantly at times and didn't get them over the line at the end of a game. Anyway, look, they've won a World Cup. They deserve to enjoy it. We've seen some, fascinating open top bus tours in cricket over the years. I think maybe one of the first ones was the West Indies, when in Australia they got a open bus tour in Australia in 60-61 because everyone loved that team so much, even though I think it was a
Wow.
draw that series. Then of course you have the 2005 Ashes, which I think ended up with Freddie Flintoff or someone from England doing a whiz in the garden at number 10. So hopefully none of the Indian players are caught in the gardens doing anything they shouldn't. But you win, you celebrate, and I think that side of it is absolutely fine. And they're probably not the first people ever, Megha, who told their employers, "Oh, we can't leave Barbados. We tried to get a flight out, but for some reason we couldn't find one."
Well, interesting. And 125 crores, we'd leave Muku to do the conversion for our fans for the Indian fans who are watching from other parts of the world. Well, is the amount that has been declared by the BCCI to be provided, to be gifted to the Indian team. And apart from that, of course, the ICC as well had increased the prize money from the previous years. And that was not just for the winner, it was for everybody participating. The prize money was up. In the meanwhile, there are a lot of questions that are trying to turn our attention away from India's victory. Just a little bit more on that. You talked about India finishing runners up and still being good because this game is a game of fine margins. Or sport for that matter is about fine margins. The 50 overs World Cup previous year held in India. Obviously, with the 50 overs World Cup, the anticipation and the build up is relatively longer. And also, with the tournament being held in India, there were a lot of fans who got emotionally invested, considering the sort of run that India had to the finals, unbeaten, and they were phenomenal. And a lot of hearts were broken back then, just 7 months back. And probably that's why the reactions now are even more animated. People are happier because they went through that heartbreak on the 19th of November and carried that pain with them throughout. A lot of memes on that and a lot of songs dedicated to that heartbreak
Can
and
you
also
sing
the
some of
11
those
years.
songs?
Jared, you were the one singing just a while back for Muku. Who's Muku? We'd reveal that much later. But why don't you try singing a song?
I don't know any of the songs for the Indian victory. If you can hum the bar, I'll join in the chorus. I promise.
In the comment section, we'd request you to please type the lyrics in English so that Jared is able to impart his own touch to it. In the meanwhile, talking about South Africa, because there's this question, as we scheduled our life, there was this question waiting for us, and that's from Parth. He says South Africa choked like 4 times in the tournament. And the pattern is not South Africa choking in big games. Maybe it's more about South Africa eventually choking due to the law of averages. Now, barring that game against the West Indies, where because of the whopping win that England registered over the USA, it didn't come to do or die situation for South Africa. That game was about do and die. They did still manage to cross the line. They still managed to cross the line against Afghanistan. It looked easy peasy, considering the conditions and considering how overwhelmed Afghanistan looked. It was only in the finals after that that they actually got tested. So, would you use the word? I will not mouth it.
They got tested all the way through. You're right. The Afghanistan game and the West Indies game were a little bit different. They were tested against England. They got
Yeah.
massively ahead in that game against England, and then they gave it away. And then England should have won easily, and South Africa fought back and won that game. Right. So that was a really, really important game at that point. The first game of the series of the World Cup that they played was against Sri Lanka. They bowled Sri Lanka out for 77, and we all thought, well, they're going to get this in 8 overs, and this will be quick. That was a stretch. They were tested against the Netherlands. They were tested against Nepal. They were tested against Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So that's why the whole thing of the word choke is a bit ridiculous. Their batting lineup really wasn't that good all the way through. And if anything, the game against India was maybe one of the times it worked better than it had before,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why, essentially, I think what we're talking about with that team is it had glaring weaknesses, which we all knew. I mean, there was a reason why I backed India at 15-1 when everyone else was saying the game was over. And that, yeah, exactly, Kaching. And that was because Bumrah had 12 balls to go and Marco Janssen was due in next. Or I might have even made the bet when Marco had come in. I can't remember. But Maharaj was due in next, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that going, well, this is not like a 99 out of 100 game. Because South Africa is not set up that way, and we've got an unnatural bowler on the other side of the mark. You know, someone who is so much better than everyone else and in his greatest form. So, you know, what about India at times in that game? What did they have? South Africa 12 for 2, and we're completely on top. When they got South Africa 4 wickets down, they were still well on top. If they had lost, would they have choked? No, they would have been beaten by another cricket team. And I think it is important to look at that. But also to say that I went back through it once and looked at the history of South Africa in World Cup tournaments. They specifically don't chase very well in those tournaments. They get themselves into problems. Quite often, it's their natural instincts. Quite often, they bat too slow. In this case, I think Bumrah is the reason they batted slow. So they need 30 off 30. He comes on, and I had absolutely no issue with them blocking out that over. And to be honest, they weren't even trying to block it out. I think Miller and Heinrich Klaasen played some shots. It's just that Bumrah bowled 2 incredible balls. So there were 2 dot balls that they stole, India. And so in the end, South Africa went into their shells a little bit. I have no issue with that over. Then you have the Rishabh Pant injury. Where he hurts his knee. Either a great tactical move, or he hurt his knee and they were trying to fix it. Either way, it was the delay at that time was a really, really important delay. And, you know, again, I was like, oh, this is not the time you want this to happen. I think I was on Twitter going, if it was me and I was Rishabh Pant, I would have got my knee wound up. And then I said, oh, it's still not quite right. I'm just going to leave the field. Can you get Sanju Samson to pad up and just delay it even further? And then the wicket comes straight after that. Those are all fairly normal cricket things to have happen. Like Bumrah is better than everyone else, and he almost dismissed Heinrich Klaasen twice in that previous over. And then the actual wicket was a poor ball that Heinrich Klaasen did the right thing. He tried to hit it away. From there, that's when the pressure really gets on them. But I don't know. I've been watching them all tournament long, and maybe a lot of people don't watch all the other games, right? But I've been watching them all tournament long, and I would say 4 or 5 times during this tournament, they batted that exact same way where you're just like, they should get this easy. Oh my God, they're making this really hard. The difference is, the other times they weren't going up against India and Bumrah. right? They weren't going up against a team that could crank the pressure back up on them.
Yeah.
And so, if anything, I would say that the weakness that we saw with South Africa was pretty evident all the way through the tournament. And to be fair to South Africa, they know about it as well. It's why Klaassen and Miller quite often bat within themselves, even though when we see them in the IPL, they're whacking things everywhere. They play for South Africa, they quite often slow down because they know one wicket is going to open up an end. And Marco Jansen is a fine player and it would be a very handy number 8. But at number 7, he is an issue. And when he's going up against Yashwat Bumrah, that's an issue. And then at number 8 is Maharaj. Who was scheduled to bat number 8 for India in this game? I think it was Akshar. And then who actually batted number 8? Was it Ravi Jadeja? So Ravi Jadeja is a guy who can bat at number 5 in test matches. And Maharaj. When we talk about choking, we need to factor in all the different parts of this.
Yeah.
It's like these are not teams that were set up correctly. If India had collapsed from that position with all their batting to come, I think there'd be a fair conversation of, wait, how did that happen? Rabada bowled well, but how did that happen? I think it makes a lot more sense with South Africa, which is why I put that bet on myself, which is why I didn't think it was a done deal at that point. But I think the twin thing of Bumrah's over coming with the break straight after it, I think really helped India. And that's how they, as you said before, find margins, right? If Rishabh Pant's knee was fine, maybe that wide ball from Hardik Pandya, that wasn't really a special ball, Klaassen just slaps that over cover. And I tell you what, there'd be less of an open top bus in Delhi today.
Interesting. Well, but then, like you mentioned about fine margins and huge difference, and the huge difference being between the number of all-rounders in the 11, pretty much similar to the Indian teams of the past that have done well in the World Cups, be it 1983 World Cup, 2007, 2011. You've got people like Yuvraj Singh to talk about who could not just win you matches with the bat, but could also chip in with the ball and be extremely handy with the ball. Similarly, in 2022 as well, once Rohit and Rahul took over, there was this emphasis on building a team that had a few all-rounders. And at times, India was trying to manufacture all-rounders, including the previous edition of the World Cup when they got, in the game against the Netherlands, they got Virat Kohli to bowl. Everybody was getting to bowl there. KL Rahul could have bowled as well, considering how intent India looked on getting those backup options ready. But there weren't a lot of all-rounders who were ready to take up the role in international cricket. We saw glimpses of them in the IPL, courtesy the impact player rule. The number of all-rounders that we saw practicing their secondary skill, that dipped further. Subsequently, in this edition of the World Cup, they went ahead with 2 left-arm spinners. They did not go for an off-spinner because there was no off-spinning all-rounder per se to be found, or an off-spinner of high quality to be found at the moment in India. And at least Akshar Patel certainly did chip in with the bat, batting at the number 4 position, giving Virat Kohli that freedom in that partnership of 72 between the duo. It was Akshar Patel who was doing all the scoring. Virat Kohli scored 21 out of 23 deliveries in that partnership, wherein Akshar scored 47 of 31. Correct me if the figures are here and there. But eventually, that probably making a lot of difference. And South Africa, on the other hand, with their 5 out-and-out bowlers, probably found themselves in trouble. In the meanwhile, before we conclude this conversation in India, would you like to take your hat off for them?
Yeah, I just want to get on the all-rounder one because I think a couple of people have put some comments in about the all-rounders. I saw one about Pefler Quayo, and I think another one about Wian Mulder as well. Yeah, so there we go. There's a couple there. So the whole thing with the all-rounders is that the reason that South Africa haven't chosen them is because those players are not on the level that they need them to be. So if they picked Pefler Quayo, they would probably have to dump another seamer. And if you look at their seamers, you know, they had a great new ball option in Marco Jansen. Didn't come great in every game, but the games he did, he was unplayable. Rabada is their main seamer, and Anrit Nortje helps them in the middle and at the death. So if you pick Pefler Quayo in, where does he really fit into that side? Who does he replace? It doesn't instantly make sense. And Wian Mulder, again, doesn't instantly make sense in a side like that. You go back to India, Akshar Patel would be playing for any team in this World Cup. And he's probably, at least in reputation, the 3rd best all-rounder that India has.
Yeah.
Right? And so that gives you a flexibility that other teams don't have. And so I know it was a huge part of India's cricket that they thought that in not having the extra all rounders there, it meant that Rohit and Virat specifically sometimes just batted too slowly, right? And that's a normal thing that batters do. Batters look at the batting order, and they go, "Oh, that's not as deep as we want it to be," and so we're going to do that. So I give a lot of respect to Rohit for picking, being part of the team and everything else, but also the way that Rohit goes about the way that he went about it was very similar to Ben Stokes, where he basically allowed for everyone else to attack because he attacked so hard. And Virat had a terrible tournament in part because he was trying to attack so much, right? All the way up
Yeah.
until the final. Those two players actually played a big role. But the reason that they could bat the way that they did is because when you've got Akshar Patel listed at number 8 or Jadeja batting at number 8, it gives you a huge flexibility. So I think sometimes with some of the other Indian sides that we've seen beforehand, they had the players to win the World Cup, and sometimes it's just dumb luck that you don't win these things. No one wants to hear that, but that's kind of the truth as well. They had the players to win it, but I don't know if they always had the system to win it. And I think the one thing that we saw in this tournament is that they had a system, they backed the system, unlike what happened in Australia, and they went for it all the way through. So there's, Rahul Dravid, Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, the three sort of, senior people within that. And obviously a lot of the assistant coaches and everyone else who had something to do that. You have to give them credit for the way that they did that. South Africa took a risk in a different way, right?
Yeah.
They took a risk with 5 frontline bowlers and they lost one game. And suddenly they've lost one game and we say, Wian Mulder or Peslaqueo should come in. Marco Janssen had a pretty good tournament, all things considered. It's just that in the final, he got whacked a little bit, and then he had to come in and face Jasprit Bumrah. He's a younger player. That's the level that he's on at the moment.
A pertinent example of the scenario that we're talking about being the game against West Indies, the first T20I last year around the same time when there was a partnership underway in a chase of not too many runs between Sanju Samson and Hardik Pandya, and they went too conservative because they realized, because back then the squad had Ravi Bishnoi, had Yuzvendra Chahal, and some of them in the 11 at all times. They could not rely on these bowlers who were brilliant in their bowling but could not rely on them with the bat, and probably that put the partnership in a shell, that put the batters in a shell. Eventually India went on to lose that game by a fine margin. The series ended 3-2 in favor of West Indies, and obviously there was a lot of backlash following it because the World Cup was to be held at the same venue and India had lost to West Indies. Meanwhile, there are a lot of questions around what to expect in the future. Rakshit Bhatt, his question is about whether going forward we could have Bumrah, Hardik as a captain. Which of the two options would you choose, or do you throw in another name?
What's your thinking on this? Who would you go with? I mean, Hardik. The problem with Hardik now is that after what happened with Mumbai, it's a little bit toxic at the moment, right? And I just he probably is the right person to captain. I always thought Rishabh Pant was a good captain at Delhi, by the way. I noticed he's not there. Bumrah's got a great cricket brain. I don't know if he wants to captain or if it's something that he's generally interested in. But Shreyas Iyer I thought was the best sort of younger captain of the players coming through. But he's not guaranteed a spot in this side and probably doesn't fit the way they play T20 cricket anymore either. So I don't know. What's your thinking?
Interesting. Akash chips in with Bumrah's name. Now, my question here is, or my argument here is, we had this conversation with Rob as well a couple of days back, and he was talking about how a lot of fast bowlers, including Jofra Archer, because they weren't managed well, they couldn't go on to achieve what they were meant for or the potential that they came with. With Archer, of course, there's a long way to go. We never know in future. He could just unleash himself, his true self. But with Bumrah as well, Indian team has managed him very, very smartly. We remember the England series, the test series was hanging in balance because India had lost the first game. Even then, there were conversations of, with the series not yet being sealed, of Bumrah being rested. So if we are talking about T20Is, even for T20Is, are we in a position to get Bumrah to play each and every game, considering the amount of cricket that India plays? And there's so much riding on every series for the broadcasters, for the fans. So are we in position to get him to play every game? And if he's a captain and doesn't play every game, what does that do to the team dynamics? If Bumrah is interested, that makes for an interesting conversation. But otherwise, I think Hardik Pandya has kind of redeemed himself. Now, food for thought, after 2022 edition of the World Cup, where India lost by 10 wickets in the semi-finals, Hardik Pandya was made the captain. He continued as the captain. Virat and Rohit weren't even considered, or probably were rested, or were kept cushioned for the 50 overs World Cup, whatever perspective we have for it. But they didn't play in the West Indies, and the World Cup was to be held in the West Indies. That would have provided for a good understanding of the team dynamics. It's only when Hardik got injured during the course of the World Cup and the way Rohit Sharma led the Indian team to the finals, the sort of attacking cricket that he brought to the fore, it was after that that the conversations veered towards Rohit and Virat being back in the 11 or in the squad. Once they were back in the squad, of course, they'd be back in the 11. Suryakumar Yadav was tried as a captain. He too got injured. So, do you think during the Afghanistan series, had Hardik been fit and raring to go, he would have become the captain and things would have panned out very differently?
I don't think so. I mean, I've had conversations on the back end of these sorts of things quite a bit. So, from my perspective, anyway, I think the overall plan was always for Rohit to play in this World Cup, and if he was going to play in this World Cup, he was obviously going to be the captain.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't have thought so. The stuff you were saying before about Bumrah is really interesting because it's the Australia problem with Pat Cummins, right? Australia now
Yeah.
can't rest Pat Cummins from a Test match. And it's one of the reasons that Pat Cummins was no longer the captain of the limited overs, the T20 side specifically, so he doesn't have to play in it if they don't want him to. So they rested him from games during the World Cup. And there was no issue, right? And so all these things are very confusing, right? And that's where we're getting. You probably need now a leadership group rather
Yeah.
than an actual individual captain in the way that when we grew up, that's what you needed. And I think that's probably the thing now. Perhaps what you say is, if you want to make Bumrah the captain, and we're just guessing here, it might not be Bumrah, of course. It's probably more likely to be Hardik. But if they do want to make Bumrah the captain, you make him the captain, but you do it so that everyone's involved. And so you say to Hardik, look, we're going to need you to lead a certain amount of games. And if Bumrah rests or certain series and allow yourself, to be able to do that. But I think if we're being honest, the amount of times bowlers will be rested from here on in, I don't think we'll see many more bowling captains in cricket. Certainly fast bowling captains. I think the future of captaincy is going to be batters because batters are going to play the majority of the games and bowlers probably won't.
And with the spinners as well, there are factors to consider, conditions. Ravichandran Ashwin wasn't considered for the World Test
Yeah.
Championships final. Good cricketing brain, but had he been the captain, how would things have looked then? So that really makes it all very complicated. Hugh has been commenting for a while now. He wants to know your opinion on Tony De Zorzi. We saw him during India-South Africa series, was explosive. But do you see him opening for South Africa in the Champions Trophy? As of now, we do not really know whether Quinton de Kock would be continuing or not. And even during the World Cup, there were 3 good innings. But apart from that, he was struggling alongside the rest of the top order. And then, of course, Riza as well struggled throughout the tournament.
I'm a big fan of De Zorzi. I think I wrote an article about a year before he played saying that he should be in the side. And I thought they were picking a lot of guys that didn't have a very high upside. They were good, steady first-class cricketers in their peak. And I thought they were going to maybe average 35 and then fade away. And I thought De Zorzi had a much bigger upside than that. I've not seen him play a lot of limited overs cricket, but from what I know, he's not a particularly fast scorer. I think in T20 cricket specifically, he struggles to score. I think his strike rate's around 115, 120. And he's a little bit better in limited overs cricket, but he's probably not the kind of future player that is a limited overs player as the way that cricket is moving forward. So I wouldn't assume that we're going to see him. I see Hugh also talked about Bettingham. I think both of those players are really good and probably should have been playing a little bit longer before than they actually did. But I'm not sure that I see either of those players as international limited overs players. Although with Bettingham, his domestic numbers are a lot better. But the way I watch him bat, I'm not sure if that's going to transfer to international cricket.
Interesting. Vignesh, looks like a big Anderson fan because he's been commenting non-stop and also questioning whether he was dropped due to his age or something else. He's got 7 wickets in county cricket recently, just a couple of days back. And he thinks, Vignesh thinks that he's got some healthy 2 years left. Now we are slated to see Anderson bid adieu at Lords. What is your opinion on that?
But just by the way, when I read that comment, I thought it said Wes Anderson for a minute, and I was like, "Are we talking about the director?" And then I wondered why the director was dropped. Anyway, it was very confusing. Um, he wasn't just dropped because of his age. He's dropped because they don't get as many overs out of him overseas as they used to. So he doesn't have the kind of impact. He was dropped because they think that they can cover him at home, but they also think that he doesn't particularly help them win that much when they travel, right? So, look, I'm probably more on. There's no real reason to move him on. Does that make sense? Like, I would have probably said to him, how much longer do you want to play for? And he would have given what, knowing Jimmy, he would have said as long as physically possible. And I was like, okay, let's give you a 2-year contract, right? But you're not going to play all the games. You're going to play occasionally when we need you, and you're going to play quite a lot. But you're not going to play all the time, and we might occasionally say to you, "Oh, we don't want you to play when you're when we want to rest you and everything else." So you might go 3 months at a time without playing all that much cricket, and then we might need you to play a little bit. But that's because we want to milk out every last bit of your talent out of you, right? And I think that's probably the best way of using a player like him. And I think that's not how they thought about it. I think they thought about it in a sort of more classical cricket way of, it's time for the new generation to come in. And it's like, well, yeah, if you have a replacement. They don't really have a Jimmy Anderson replacement. And
Exactly.
his form over the last 3 years away from home, it's interesting because, he did okay in the Ashes, but again, his biggest problem in Australia is not that he doesn't bowl well, it's that he never takes a lot of wickets. And so he doesn't always have a big impact on Australia. But I thought he bowled okay when he was playing in Australia. He went to India and he took 10 wickets in 4 matches. He probably had one test where he had a big impact, but a couple of times where he bowled well. Again, did any other English seamers bowl better than him in India?
Yeah.
Right? He took wickets when he played against New Zealand, and he did okay in Pakistan in kind of, again, a limited role. So that's fine. You know what that is. When he goes away, you might need to play an all-rounder with him because he won't be able to bowl as many overs. But he's still going to be really handy in certain situations. Like, they've got a tour of New Zealand coming up, right? Like, why would you not want Jimmy Anderson to play in New Zealand? The whole idea of wanting to move on from a player is not really how these things go. The best way of using your talent is to make sure that, I mean, they've kept him around for this long. Why suddenly get rid of him now because they want to rebuild? Whereas actually what they should be saying to him is, do you know this summer, we only want you to play 2 tests? And he'd be like, oh, well, what do you mean? It's like, no, we want you to play 2 tests because we think we can beat both of these teams without you. So let's just give you a couple of tests, make sure that you're still ticking over. You can play a couple of first-class games as well, but we want to bring in these other guys, right, and get them ready because we've got a couple of bowlers here that we want to use probably in Asian conditions, in New Zealand conditions, and in Australian conditions over the next, whatever it is, year and a half, right? So we're going to develop these players, and you're going to sit on the bench a bit, right? But then when we have a really important test match, or when it's 1-1 against West Indies, because the West Indies bowlers have done it, we're going to bring you out. That is how you use your talent, right? But you have to have that conversation with him. And I don't think they did. I think they just said to him, it's time to go, mate. We're going to do a reset here, which is fine, except for the fact you miss out on that level of talent. And it doesn't, just because you press the reset button doesn't mean you get another Jimmy Anderson, right? You might get another Matthew Hoggard, right? You might get another Graham Onions. It's very hard to get another player of Jimmy Anderson's level.
And the experience that he brings in, although they do want to harness that, they will involve him as a mentor. And there's no role clarity per se at the moment, but they do want to continue with Anderson in some capacity or the other. He just doesn't get to go on the ground and bowl the primary skill that he boasts of. Now, in the meanwhile, as we conclude our conversation, there's this question from Sports Fan, which is about the future. And do you see India solving number 8 issues in ODIs for Champions Trophy like they did in the T20 World Cup? And more than that, beyond that, there is another series that is following, 5-match T20Is against Zimbabwe. India get to test their combinations. India gets to figure out what are the gaps that have been created, that have existed, that need to be filled. Do you see more of all-rounders being groomed from here?
Um, so if India want to, so I did an article when they lost in Australia, basically saying the players that they have available to them could win a World Cup in it. I was talking T20, but T20 or ODI cricket, right? It could easily win a World Cup. What they actually have is incredible flexibility to try multiple different kinds of lineups.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about this. I talked to Dravid just before this World Cup, so I knew that this was the lineup he was going with. But I also knew that he'd thought about the sort of stuff I was talking about as well. Of, we could do this lineup, or we could do this lineup, which is a great place
Great
to
minds
be.
think alike.
Well, he's got a great mind, and I was happy enough. Occasionally, you get lucky, but the point being is that they're still in that sort of situation, so they can very much, if they want, look at a lineup where you have Hardik in your top 6. You can pick, let's say, a Rinku Singh type player as your number 7, and you can have Akshar at number 8. You still have 5 specialist bowlers there. It's a little bit weaker on bowling than it might be otherwise, but they have 5 specialist bowlers available to them. And if they kept picking Shivam Dube, which they might not for one-day cricket, they might see him as more of a T20 prospect. But if they have Shivam Dube, they have 1 or 2 spare overs from Shivam Dube to be able to bowl. Who knows? Maybe someone like a Rian Parag comes in and you get 1 or 2. We're talking T20 one-day cricket, aren't we? We're talking 3 or 4 overs. Of coming in and being able to do something like that. It's a riskier team, but they could still have a really long batting lineup if they want to go in that direction. What they can't do is have the 3 all-rounders, so that they have the dream, which is we have 6 bowling options, of which we think 4 of them are completely frontline, and then we have Hardik / whichever the backup left arm finger spinner is if we need them in that situation. That has probably gone. I'm trying to think. Am I missing a young? Oh no, who's the young guy out of Sunrisers? The all-rounder.
Reddy.
Yeah. So they have the option. It might be Champions Trophy might be a good time. He may not be that good, but they do have the option of someone like him, which again would bring them back. But they don't have 2 or 3 other all-rounders coming through right at the moment who are ready for that next tournament. But he might be the one. Then you go, okay, it's 2 right-arm seamers with him and Hardik, but if we have Hardik at 6, we have him at 7. And we have Akshar at 8. We still have our 6 bowling options. And then if Hardik has a bad day or Akshar has a bad day, he can bowl as well. He can bowl slightly different times. He bowls in a slightly different way than Hardik. You have those sorts of options. That they can go with that kind of a lineup. But yeah, it's not as easy without Jadeja, because Jadeja is a world-class player in 3 different disciplines, right? And so things change quite a bit. The next 2 World Cups, next 2 ICC trophies, so Champions Trophy and T20. Well, they're both in Asia, aren't they? And so, there's some young players coming through that perhaps, who knows what Washington Sundar will be able to do in the next 2 to 3 years, because we all know he should be better than he is, and it's never quite happened. They might find another player of, a similar kind of player who can come through and do something as well. And in Asia, sometimes, you talked about Yuvraj Singh before. Like, Yuvraj Singh's not really an all-rounder outside of Asia, but in Asia, he's probably a fine 5th bowler. And when he got older, he was even better than fine 5th bowler, right? So sometimes you can cheat that a little bit more. And then when they get to South Africa for the World Cup in 2027, does that sound right? Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe if Hardik's still playing and Reddy's playing, they've now got 2 seam bowling all-rounders potentially available to them. So there is some flexibility, but you don't know how these players are going to break. And as in, you don't know who's going to break out. You don't know who's going to lose form. You don't know who's going to get injured and everything else. But right at the moment, they still have 2 all-rounders that they can trust in. If they get it back to 3, then they go back to that sort of glory period where you've got batting to 8 and 6 bowling options. And every team in the world would want to start a World Cup doing that.
Interesting. Well, with IK joining, our backroom staff is as big as any in international cricket. And talking about backroom staff, you alluded to Rahul Dravid, with him signing off as Indian coach for the time being. And with you having enjoyed a lot of conversations with him, your closing thoughts on him. I promise the last question would be the last one, but this would be the last one.
Look, for me, I've worked in cricket so long. I get asked the question a lot. Do you still care about Australia winning and all this sort of stuff? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like when Australia wins, I really like it. It doesn't bother me as much when they lose. Partly, I figure that they'll get it right again in the next couple of years, and something will happen, and I'll enjoy that
Wow,
again.
that's nirvana.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but I've never been an overly nationalistic person either. So I enjoy the highs. I don't worry about the lows the way that other people do. Doesn't mean the Australian team doesn't drive me nuts, but as you know, lots of teams drive me nuts. But what you do start to get in this career is, I know Jonathan Trott, and I haven't talked to Trotty, and maybe I'll try and get him on a podcast at one stage and chat to him. But I haven't talked to him since the Afghanistan thing, but what a ride for Jonathan Trott these last two World Cups have been, right? He took that job when it wasn't really a coveted job. Like people were kind of accepting it, but didn't
For
want to do
various
it.
reasons.
Yeah, and then Trotty's like, no, I'm going to do this. And I think a lot of people in county cricket went, why would he take that? He'll work in county cricket for life. So I enjoyed Jonathan Trott having success, right? As someone I've known for a few years. And Rahul Dravid the same. You look at that, and as on a personal level, I go, do you know what? I remember being told by people, oh, he was a defensive player, so he can't coach in T20 cricket.
Yeah.
And you're just like, that's not how that works. In fact, him and Jonathan Trott were both defensive players, right? But that's not how those things work, right? And, for me to see someone who I know worked really hard, and then we saw the emotion of it,
Yeah.
he was tense over the last, little while. He thought he was putting that team in a good position to play really good cricket, and then they got to the points that they needed to, and it didn't happen. And I think he was getting a little bit annoyed with all that as well. So, good on him. I kind of feel this way, and I don't know all the Indian players. I know a couple of them, but I don't know all the Indian players. But I kind of feel the same way. I just feel like if you were Hardik or Sky or Rohit, a lot of those players who didn't have a lot of trophies from World Cups. At least Kohli had the big one, but even Kohli is part of that, and Bumrah is another one. I just think that they all deserve that, that moment of release and that moment of success. And I would have felt the same if South Africa had won, right? This was the best thing about this World Cup was that Australia and England didn't make it through to the final. And so the narrative was always going to be one team overcoming a hoodoo.
Yeah.
And we got that. Unfortunately for South Africa, they did theirs in a ridiculous way that obviously didn't quite work. But there we have it.
Cathartic indeed for the Indian fans. And like you mentioned about the criticism that was directed at Rahul Dravid, it was about him being a defensive player, and subsequently it was assumed that he'd be a defensive coach, and at the same time he'd be accused of being experimental and experimenting too much. And those two at times do sound contradictory and ironical, but in the end, as they say, all's well that ends well. Signed off as under 19 coach with the trophy in 2018 with Shubman Gill the captain, and now finally in the international seniors cricket as well managed to get his hands on the trophy. And when he did get his hands on the trophy, the animated reactions were there for everybody to see. And empathy is probably a very understated quality, but for a coach, I think that's extremely important, because unlike a football coach, the cricket coach is never going to get all the powers. It's about creating that right environment, understanding the players. And on that nice, cute note, I think we can sign off, can we?
Done.
All right, then. Thank you so much, Jarrod. Thanks to everybody who pitched in with questions, and we'd love to have more of your questions. We take them all next time. As of now, thank you for joining. Goodbye.